Like the womb work that we do, sure, you can call it shadow work. I
Mhm.
dare say identity work, but it's so much more than that. It's so much more than taking back your power and activating your divine feminine. It's the act of ending the generational trauma, identifying patterns, wanting to change it, connecting with the soul of your baby before you even knew. There's something powerful about landing yourself beyond your ego, beyond what is visible to you in front of you. And that really it kind of bonds people to like that are similarly getting pregnant together, and it's a cosmic experience versus just I got pregnant here and it took or it didn't stick, but like and if it doesn't stick, there's support and you're not alone. And that's the biggest thing is breaking the silence and the stigma of having to do it alone or suffering in silence.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins.
Hello, and welcome to the 76th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week, I have with me Carolina Sotomayor. She is the creator of Make a Baby programs, and she is your dedicated womb healer. She's been fortunate to guide and heal many women, contributing to the welcoming of over 95 beautiful Reiki babies into the world. Her journey started as a newlywed, facing the heartache of infertility. Despite doctors assuring her that everything was okay and advising her to relax, disappointment filled each passing month. It was a turning point when her therapist and trusted psychic suggested Reiki to align her chakras. Taking their advice, she experienced Reiki, and the next month, she was happily pregnant with her son, Ollie. Now, she is a Reiki healer herself and helps women conceive and heal their womb traumas. I had a really wonderful time connecting with Carolina in this episode. She is really honest and candid about her own story and her journey through helping herself to help other women. And there's a lot of wisdom in this episode. So here is my conversation with Carolina.
Love it.
It's all about where you want to go.
Perfect. I'm comfortable with every part of my story. I've done the work.
Excellent. Okay, Carolina. So you are a guide for women to something that is very intimate and perhaps like one of the most profound moments for a lot of women in their lives. And so, in order for you to have become the guide, there are a lot of things that you had to go through yourself in order to get there.
Yes. I like
And
to say
one,
I went
yeah.
first so you didn't have to.
And so, one of the first things that I like to ask, because this podcast is about the inner voice and following it,
Mm.
when is the first time that you realized that you had this inner voice within yourself and you were able to follow it?
Well, there is the concept of like the identity of like my own being my own guide. I'd probably say when I was 15 and I decided not to live with my mom and to live with my dad. And that what was when I knew absolute in absoluteness that living with my mom would result in me having a terrible life. And I needed to not be in that environment, even if I didn't know what the other environment was. Because my dad, I had never lived with my dad. I almost had no contact with him for 4 years prior to that. And at age 15, I moved from Pennsylvania to Miami and I lived with him and I stayed there until I was 29. So it was the first time was at age 15 when I just like knew, and I in that time I didn't know anything about other than I just felt this in my whole body that if I wanted a life more than what I was seeing with alcoholism and toxicity and the abuse, I had to leave. Luckily I had a place where I could leave too, but I just didn't know him. Like I had never lived with him and had very little interaction with him. So I listened to my voice and I ended up living with my dad. So I went from one parent to the next, but it was really an estranged parent.
Wow. Okay. So you grew up, it sounds like, in a pretty toxic environment, which you had to protect yourself and your
100%.
energy. So was that something that you were aware of even younger as a young child, that you had to protect yourself? Or how did you, because that's a very wise decision for someone who's 15 to be able to.
Prior to that, I was in and out of therapy, and I was very unwell, mentally. I think that where I was like, I had intrusive thoughts and it was very dark, and I I I knew prior to age 15, like if I stayed, I would end up just like her, me, my mom, being like an alcoholic. There was no opportunity in that town. I just could only envision working at the gas station or the grocery store, like the grocery mart. And like there was just nothing in this town that was just dying up. And I knew as young as 5 that when I became a mom, I would do things different. Like just the things that she chose to put us through. I was like, I just kind of always knew that this is not the way it was supposed to be. That this is like I would do things differently. Like I always knew like what she was doing was wrong.
Yeah. So Pennsylvania to Miami
Mhm.
is quite a change.
And it was quite the change, but it was the best decision. It literally quite saved my life in many ways.
Yeah, and did you feel after making that decision that things started opening up for you in new ways in your life? Or how did that transition go?
So I went from being physically abused to not being physically abused, and I thought that was an uplift. I didn't know anything about emotional and mental abuse, and that's what I walked into. But I
Mm,
didn't know it at the time, so I felt much safer, and that helped me feel like I could open up. And I went from probably a really quiet kid to being a kid that had more confidence just because I felt like I was safer because I wasn't being physically abused. I just didn't understand that. I didn't know until much later, even after years after my dad had passed, that he was a narcissist. So
mm,
I just felt much safer because I was no one was physically hurting me anymore. Um, and I thought I was like, okay, this is what love's like because nobody's hitting me. So
mhm.
I did. So I finished half of my junior year and all of my senior year in a predominantly Cuban high school. And there was a huge culture shock. But for me, the thing that was different was like I had more opportunity. Like I just had, even though he was a narcissist, he did believe in me and he was very heavy into academics. My dad was very present in my life versus my mom was like very checked out. So like I had soccer practice. My dad sat and he was at every soccer practice and watched me rant. Like you didn't have to, like he was just very present. He was always there. So it was very like it was a 180. So I did thrive in ways that I didn't have opportunities in this much larger city, like a metropolis versus like this really small town of like 400 students in the entire school, whereas my graduating class had over 1,100.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's much bigger school.
As far as like your spirituality goes, was that something that was integrated in your upbringing, or is that
No.
something? Yeah.
I remember seeing my first ghost at probably age 4 or 5. We lived in a very old trailer where my with my mom, and we lived on a very old property. And I described, and I can still remember this lady floating in our kitchen, and I described her to my mom, and she got very quiet and she goes, where did you see her? And I was like, well, I've seen her a few times. I've seen her in the barn and I've seen her in the kitchen. And it's usually like either early morning or in the evening, and usually when I was alone. And it turned out to be the previous property owner. We lived on this property with my aunt. She lived in the house, and then we had a trailer, and it was the woman that had owned the property before my aunt had bought it and where we lived. And she had died on this property. And she had lived there for decades. So that was the first encounter. And I was like, oh, there was always something different
Mhm.
that I could see. But then when I got Reiki attuned and my dad had passed, I wanted to become a medium. And every time I got in a Reiki attunement and I went up a level, my sense of spirit guides in the other side just opened up more and more. And then the more practice, the sharper my messages got. And then eventually that sprouted into communicating with babies, as I decided to focus into fertility and the babies that women had lost. So it just kind of morphed into I wanted to talk to my dad, and that was just kind of like universal, like saying like, okay, that's your idea of where you want to go with this, but we really
Mhm.
have bigger plans for you. So
Yeah.
it started with seeing ghosts, and then just always believing that I believed that there was always something more because that was like one of my first memories.
Yeah. So, what led you to the Reiki attunement was to connect with your father? Is that what I got right?
That was my
Mhm.
Reiki attunement, but
Yeah.
what led me to Reiki was actually my dad had died, and I was in grief therapy, and I'd fallen off my horse. And this is more than a year and a half into it, after he had died. Um, I went to the psychic sword to see if there was any crystals for concussion, and because I was put on medical leave, and I knew that if I didn't get back on my horse like immediately, I wasn't going to be able to ride for a very long time because we were actively trying to conceive. We hadn't been able to conceive. There was nothing wrong with me. And the lady who had given me readings and I've been taking classes with, she's like, your throat chakra and your sacral plexus chakra, which is your womb, is blocked. You need Reiki. You don't need a crystal. That same week in grief therapy, she told me, she's like, you should be progressing more. And she goes, you've been in here like once a week, sometimes twice a week. You're doing the work, but for you to feel better, because I was so done being tired and sad, being and grieving so hard. And my grief after losing my dad was very physical for me.
Mhm.
She's like, you should do an antidepressant, or I was like, I'm not going to do that. She goes, then you should try Reiki. You need to get the trauma out of your tissues. So I went and saw, so it was two people the same week. The next week, I went and got a Reiki massage, and I was pregnant the next month with my son. And that's what started Reiki for me, was the recommendation of two people one week, two people who were very much responsible for progressing me in my grief and in my spiritual journey. And then I got Reiki through my pregnancy, distance Reiki through my birth. And it's really what successfully pulled me out of my postpartum. I had severe postpartum depression and anxiety. And it's really with that and talk therapy that helped me function and be able to go back to work and kind of recover.
Mhm. Yeah, so it sounds like Reiki was a tool that helped you, and so you wanted to pick that tool up so you could help other people with that as well.
It started with just wanting to, our son had really chronic bad ear infections. And I didn't, when we first got the attunement, she was kind of like the lady who gave me the attunement is the lady who I had Reiki the entire time. Kind of call her my Reiki mother. She's been my mentor. She's been a life-changing human to me. Um, I would say that I got the Reiki attunement because she almost pestered me to get it. And I was on a 2-week break between jobs, and I had the time, so I went and I did it, and she's like, "This is gonna help. You can give him Reiki to help ease his pain in his ears because he had to have so many ear infections before he could get tubes, all the things." And, eventually then 6 months later, I was like, "I need to help women. This is gonna help women with postpartum." And then after a couple of years, it just morphed into fertility. And then so I'm preconception into postpartum is our gamut. So we'll help you get pregnant, but we'll carry you the whole way through.
Yeah. Would you mind maybe describing Reiki a little more in depth for the listeners,
Sure.
just so they can maybe have an understanding of what it is if they are not familiar?
Oh, yes. So Reiki is a Japanese energy healing modality, and it takes the life force energy, which is the essence of what makes something alive versus not. So it is the essence that makes it's the force behind making your lungs expand, the grass grow, your nails and hair grow. And we harness that energy through the palms of our hands, and it is then given to the client. The client needs to consent, and the energy does not come from the practitioner. The practitioner, it should be a clear channel or conduit, and the energy comes from Mother Earth, universe, God, and it can work with any religion, no religion, and it allows you to heal all layers of your aura. You have 5 different bodies in your aura and works with what's called the chakra system. And there's 7 main energy centers, which is a chakra. And each of those chakras should be spinning, flowing, and connected to one another for your optimal health. If one is imbalanced, block, or excessively spinning, or going too fast, then that means that area of the body can be experiencing pain, blockage, like for example, our throats. If we don't speak our truth, and we don't express our needs and our desires and have good communication, and we hold too much back, our throat chakras, we can result in like thyroid issues or sore throats. Um, with our wombs, which is my favorite chakra, obviously, that's where is our emotional reservoir, and that's where we store a lot of our stuck emotions that we get, and we're taught as a society to stuff or not to feel or rush our emotions, and so we don't feel emotionally safe a lot of the times to feel our emotions the full way through. So with Reiki, it allows all of your chakras to be open and anything that is a lower vibration to come to the surface. So in a Reiki session, you can feel tingles, waves of warmth, you can fall asleep. A person can close their eyes and they can have feelings within them move through. They can see colors of the different chakras that are being healed. Sometimes people can cough or they might yawn. Sometimes people might cry because things that are stuck in your tissues are going to be released and come to the surface. So you might remember something, or sometimes people have spiritual experiences and sometimes they don't. And during a Reiki session or a Reiki guided meditation, they might connect with a loved one that may have passed or their higher self or a future baby. A lot of things can happen within Reiki, but it also doesn't interfere with any medical treatment plan. It only complements it, and it doesn't interfere with any drugs. So that's why I always like to say Reiki is going to be your best friend in no matter what medical treatment plan you're doing.
Yeah, excellent. And because of your psychic abilities, I've is that an enhancement to your Reiki? Do you feel that?
I feel like it's like the sidecar. It's not the main event. For some people, it might be why they're attracted to work with me, but I feel like and not every practitioner has the same gifts, but I feel I'm best at Reiki, and then my second thing is the psychic mediumship. Um, as long as I focus on the Reiki, the messages always flow the way they're supposed to. But if sometimes I don't get anything if I focus too hard on the mediumship and I don't let the Reiki flow. So I always do a little bit of Reiki before a session starts and on myself and to open the channel. Um, and I use tools. Sometimes I use crystals. Most of the time I use oracle cards. Um, but first, always a Reiki practitioner, and second, a medium. But what has happened besides just channeling, I'm able to see energy, and I think that's just a development of kind of the surgence of my third eye chakra, and trusting myself so much in the marrying of that mediumship where I have the gift of kind of seeing inside of a womb and seeing where the blockages are and where I need to remove like stuck energy behind maybe an ovary, or like sending like and like sensing, is there more follicles over in this ovary, or like this, or like if sensing if lining's too thin, and then I can tell the client, say, hey, I need you to talk to your doctor, and always with the disclaimer that take this with a grain of salt, but you can tell them the crazy Reiki lady thinks that your lining's too thin. um, can, do the appropriate testing, have a conversation with him to see what the remedy is on that side. Because Reiki doesn't replace medical care, but it can definitely help you get to where you need to go.
Yeah. When is the first time that you acknowledged that you had a gift for the womb in particular? Is there something that led you there specifically besides your own?
I was working with a shaman, and gosh, I think this was in 2019 because we were living in this house. So we were newly in this house. And so this was 2 years after I got attuned. I was a Reiki master at that point, and I had done multiple trainings that year, and I was just revolutionizing. I was, like, going through kind of, like, taking an inventory, and then I had gotten one shaman session from a local lady, and she was really great. And I noticed that this ancestral, like, she noticed the same pattern, and it was the first time that I had told anyone about my assaults
Mm,
in my 20s. I was very open about my abortion, but I had never told anyone about my assaults. And then with her, and I was talking to my mom, I was able to discover that we have an ancestral wound for sexual abuse. And when I told my mom about this, she goes, "Oh, it doesn't surprise me. Everyone in our family and our side has had that done." Or and I was like, that's incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad. How come nobody's ever talked about this?" And she goes, "Well, you don't talk about those things." And my mom's much older, like, she's in her 70s. So, um, and then when dissecting it, it was always done by a family member. So for me,
mm,
it wasn't done by a family member, but so I worked with the shaman to clear that. And it was also around that time that I was seeing a lot of women who were mirroring. So as a healer, there's almost like this cosmic law that your clients will mirror what you need to work on, or you're working on the same things at the same time. So I was also seeing a lot of women who were struggling either with intimacy or unpleasant sexual experiences, or they were not, or they had been sexually assaulted. So it was a long period of time. It was a good portion, at least 4 to 6 months of that year. We were working together with a shaman, and then I was like, "Wait a minute, there's a theme here." And it was during that time someone called me the womb healer. So, it wasn't necessarily all fertility focused, but, like, these wounds make up huge parts, and it's very common, unfortunately, for a lot
mhm.
of women to have endured.
Yeah. Do you feel that you have healed that wound for yourself?
I feel like I have done a lot of work around it to make myself feel safe enough to talk about it, to hold space for others, and I've done enough work to not feel that such deep pings of pain when I talk about it and or acknowledge it or share. I always put boundaries of like how deep of I go into the actual experience. That kind of unravels me, so I don't do that. But I've done a lot of work to make sure that I can exist and feel like me and be me and embody me. And that was what the work that it came with the shaman, of like understanding it wasn't just my wound, it wasn't just my event, but it was ending this pattern. And
Mhm.
why was there this pattern? And there are some things I think you just never get answers for, no matter how good of a shaman somebody is. And, so many lives have been lived before you. And unfortunately, I think you know, you can look at it from a logical point, but just an awareness of like, as women, we haven't always been treated well. We haven't always had a lot of rights. And I think also just like recognizing and being just really honest and really aware that it's also like that for different races. Like this is like not just an acknowledgement that this is not a pretty topic, and but it's definitely something that is weaved through so many women's lineages, and understanding that too. Like, so I don't have to own the wound, being fully responsible, and I think that that's what I set out to do, but it's making sure it ends with me. So I can't, but just having that awareness of that there is a full history here and it's complicated, and putting boundaries around it as best as I can. But also understanding like the scope of what I'm responsible for and what is really realistic and healing is really important. And I think having that conversation with yourself and the person you're working with is important to have around the containers of healing.
Yeah, yeah, you're healing like generational trauma as well as your own. And
Yes, that's exactly what it was, because my mom
yeah,
wasn't going to do it.
yeah.
And she certainly didn't speak about it, and she's done the best she can in her life. But certainly, I'm going to make sure, you know, I have a son. I'm going to make sure that, you know, what is everything that stems from this, so that I can, and like the fact that I'm the awareness of this and that I have, it ends with me. That I can, that is a scope that I can take on.
Yeah, and because you have gone through those experiences,
Exactly.
you're able to kind of look at it from the inside out and really connect with people in a really like deeply profound way that they might not have access to otherwise. So it's a deep healing. Yeah.
I think it's also recognizing that like what I am not responsible for what happened to me, but I also have spent time in therapy and also with the shaman to dissect it. What decisions did I make to lead me to interact with that person? And I wanted to heal that. Um, because I could have made decisions differently. And I know that if people will have controversy, but like I have dissected this from every angle, and people will have always said, well, this is not your fault. Well, I was there and I made decisions to get to that point or to know this person. So I particularly took an audit of my life and like what wounds led me to make those decisions or want to associate with that kind of person or get there. And then I look now as an adult, as a 40-year-old mom, am I ensuring that I'm supporting? So there was a wound there. There was a lack of self-worth, there was a lack of self-trust in my 20s. There was a lack of knowing that I could have more or that I deserved more. And it's making sure that that itself and my parenting is not repeated. So I can kind of as do my very best to proof to kind of like child proof that, so my son does not have a lack of self-worth, does not have a lack of support or a lack of knowing that he can come and ask for help or a safe place to speak to. So a lot of that's really been really important for me to regulate into my relationship as a parent, to ensure like going deeper of like why did some of these, what was the wounds or what was the contributors to why I made decisions and feel like I felt leading up to the event. And that has made me me feel like so much better, and having
Yeah.
open conversations with my son. He doesn't know the things that have happened. He doesn't need to know that, but like continuously saying, okay, do you know that you can come, you know, or having what we call a safe circle. He has safe people. There's a group of safe people he can speak to, not just to mom and dad, but like that, you know, he always has support.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
always has he's a very aware, and his behavior is very different than mine was at those ages to, he exhibits self-worth already.
Yeah, that's a really courageous self-awareness that you have to be able to explore those like things about yourself, by the way. I just want to give you a credit
I
for that.
appreciate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it was Dr. Gabor Mate that I heard this from, and I think this is one of his teachings, is that if you have a trauma and you don't feel safe enough to go to the people to tell them about it, then there's already a trauma there. The fact that you're providing that for your son is really special. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the description of most of the point of my childhood was I didn't have a safe place, or I just had like, well, that seems like I only had like ultimatums. I only had this one choice, and it's not even a great choice, but it's better than that one.
Yeah, and also I feel like you're doing some work that is so needed because the information from women doesn't really get trickled down as it used to, especially with like the internet and the separation of competition and comparison and like, am I doing this right? There's like a disconnect between like the wisdom from older generations to newer ones. And so I think this is really fantastic work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. I agree. I feel I don't know how to fix that either, or how to make an impact to other than highlight other women's stories. That's a huge reason why I started my own podcast. Um, it's 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 something I wish. I desire more community. I desire more connection. I mean, it's a huge conversation between my husband and I even, but like, yeah, we women need more of each other.
Yeah, so what have you found within community since you've started doing this work and your podcasts? Like, what are some things that you can share?
I have changed quite a bit. The more work, and the more like, in order to hold space for others in an ethical and integral way, you have to be doing your own work all of the time. I do take breaks, but I'm never done. And when so for that means I'm either working with a different type of modality, or working with someone else, or just exploring different things in my own world and then bringing that in. And I like to experiment first with me. I'm like, yes, this worked out. This was successful. What do you think of this idea? In human design, I'm a projector. So I can see patterns. So I'm very good at finding my own patterns. So I can observe things and I share those patterns like, hey, I noticed that XYZ and this is how I solved it. And then people tend to like it. So in community, in this evolution, I have shed many versions of myself. I've shed very much different beliefs, and I have expanded and I have deconstructed so much of myself and my faith. And I have found the most worthwhile, impactful humans in this Reiki journey, that much more that are I just have found the most fantastic women in having had Reiki, in Reiki conversations. And there are women that I when I die, I'm going to be smiling because there's just something different about these type of relationships, the depth that I feel, versus like old coworkers I had who just don't get it, or like, oh, like she's doing that spiritual woo woo stuff. So she pulls cards. But like the womb work that we do, sure, you can call it shadow work. I dare say identity work, but it's so much more than that. It's so much more than taking back your power and activating your divine feminine.
Mm.
It's the act of ending the generational trauma, identifying patterns, wanting to change it, connecting with the soul of your baby before you even know. There's something powerful about lending yourself beyond your ego, beyond what is visible to you in front of you. And that really, it kind of bonds people to like that are similarly getting pregnant together and it's a cosmic experience versus just I got pregnant here and, it took or it didn't stick, but like, and if it doesn't stick, there's support and you're not alone. And that's the biggest thing is breaking the silence and the stigma of having to do it alone or suffering in silence. Because if you suffer in silence when you're trying, most likely you're going to suffer in silence when you're in postpartum, the baby's colicking and you don't know what to do. And that is dangerous. So it's dangerous to be alone, like to suffer and be alone. You don't have to. And we have free spaces so that you don't have to. And we have paid spaces too. But also just breaking like the stigma of like you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to anymore. It's better if you don't.
Yeah. So how can women work with you if they would like to
Sure.
be a part of your community? Yeah.
So we have different ways you can follow us on TikTok, on YouTube. Take a look at the Bank a Baby podcast. We'll send you a link for the show notes. We just started a new series called What is Fertility Reiki? And that's a 6-part podcast series that will be dripped into your email. You'll get an invitation to try the Make a Baby membership, which is my favorite thing I've ever created. It's you get three free days inside that, and we teach you how to do Reiki for yourself and heal your own womb. We have monthly live healing calls, and we have a private podcast for the membership. So you get to ask all your questions, as many as you want, and I make episodes out of them, and they're only for the members, only for the members. And we have a vault of meditations that are recorded and written by me for fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum, but also for nervous system regulation. But also we have a whole module on the self healing activation, which is Reiki 1, which is what you need to heal yourself. So not only am I going to help you heal your womb and connect to your spirit baby, but you're going to learn how to do it for yourself, which is super empowering because life happens. If you're not ready to commit yet, we have a free Facebook group, which you'll be invited to join. And in there, you can connect with other like-minded women, and we go live fairly often in that Facebook group. So, yeah, there's a lot of free resources.
Yeah. Excellent. I'll put all of those into the show notes so people can click on them really easily and have
Perfect.
access to those. Yeah. So is there anything like that's on like the top of your heart or your mind that we haven't covered yet that you want to make sure that you get out there?
Oh, I do. Whether you're trying to conceive or you're feeling stuck in life and you don't want babies, whatever your stance is that you always have options and you always can heal. And healing is not a one-time event, it's a relationship. Just like they always say, it's very common. You might say you have to have a relationship with money. I like to say you need to have a relationship with healing. Reiki may not be your jam, like, I've tried hypnosis for a long time and it just didn't stick. But find what does work for you. And it is possible to get to the other side.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen in one sitting.
Yeah. Dedication and an
Yeah.
investment in yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's a misconception of healing. Well, I tried it once, didn't work. Well, try something else. And I promise, like, try it a few times, try something 3 times and see, if something doesn't work for you, then don't do that, but try something else. And I think that that's like the biggest thing that I can see is that you need to choose what works for you.
I just heard the word misconception like differently for the first time when you just said it because of the topics that we're talking about. Just that word, misconception and the etymology of it probably
Oh,
feels really relevant to our conversation.
I finally got it. That's so funny.
So I usually wrap up the conversation with this one last question. And that is if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Oh my. Laugh more, do the rest later.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that.
because for me is if I can make a person feel safe, then they can feel their emotions. But if I can make you feel joy, it can do so much to open your womb. It can do so much for emotional regulation. It can do so much for your fertility. It can do so much for your soul. It can do so much for your hormones, for regulating your hormones. It can do so much for your reproductive health, just overall. And then the frequency of which joy gives you will change your whole body. And I always say, like, the laughter, the full body laughter, like the kind of one that makes your stomach hurt, or like you hear a baby giggle and like it's the full laugh. And if you can
Yeah,
get that, it will fix so much. Um, do the rest later. There'll be
yeah.
more work, there'll be more dishes, there'll be more bottles, there will be more of everything. I mean, I always have a ton of admin things to do. There will always be more, but like my son still wants me around. Like he's 7. That's not gonna always be that way. So these are very different years for me than they will be probably when he hits 13, when he's like, peace out. So right now I'm spending a lot of time laughing with him. And that's like my focus besides
Yeah,
besides serving women. It's serving women weaved in through what works best for us.
that really reminds me of the connection between like the sacral chakra and creativity and playfulness and sexuality.
Yeah,
All that all comes together. So
all
that's
together.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, the more childlike you are, the more joy you're gonna have, the more imagination you're gonna use, which means the more activated your intuition is gonna be. The more joyful you are, the more brave you are gonna be when you speak up, because you're feeling yourself. You're connected to your body, you're connected to your mind, you're connected to your voice. Joy will activate so many parts of you, but if you are not joyful and you're tired, you're not gonna feel strong enough to stand up or speak your truth or let go of the fear of being rejected or persecuted for what you have to say.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Do the rest
Yeah.
later.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know that other people will get some benefit out of this too. So,
Well, thank you for having me. It was an honor to share space with you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.